We're going to talk about this a minute because you have a quiz on it, so let's see what we can learn from this. Starting the government was not easy. First of all, we were starting from scratch. There hadn't been years of trial and error like other governments had, but now all of a sudden in 1781 we've won the Revolutionary War and we're going to start a new government. Yay! Do you guys remember your sophomore year when I had you do the thing where I dropped you into the forest and you had to decide what you were going to do first to survive? Do you remember that exercise? Yeah, most of you came up very quickly with once you were sheltered and had a source of water, you needed to figure out some rule of order. And that's important for humans to live together. But the thing that's unique about the United States, and I find this really exciting, is we had intelligent men come together and say, how can we make a government of the people? And it didn't just evolve through thousands of years of warriors fighting and kings and emperors. It was starting from scratch. And I want to read you a quote by James Madison. He said, "Nothing has excited more the admiration in the world than the manner in which free governments have been established in America, for it was the first instance from the creation of the world that free inhabitants have been seen deliberately on a form of government and selecting such of their citizens as possess their confidence to determine upon and give effect to it." So the first time that free men actually got to determine a government. What a unique experience. And it did excite the minds of the world. They wanted to see what happened. They wanted to see if we were going to fail or succeed. Now, there was the fact that the colonies had been doing self-government for 150 years. But fortunately, those had also been built on the ideas of freedom and government by the people. And so the states, or they were now states, they had been colonies, the colonies had made up their own sort of rules and regulations. They'd already done this. Now, let me show you how the power of the people came into play. This is really interesting. Concord objected to the legislature writing the Constitution. Now, the legislature assumed that because they'd been elected by the people, that they had the consent of the people and were the voice of the people. So here they'd elected a legislature. The legislature was going to write the rules, and the people objected to them writing the rules. And here's why. It started with the people of Concord. They pointed out that if the regular legislature wrote the Constitution, it would be able to change it just as easily later on. To the people of Concord, that did not seem like much protection to their liberties. Instead, Concord suggested that a separate select group be chosen to write the Constitution that would be dismissed afterwards. Now, Massachusetts ignored that, and they went ahead and they presented their document for approval, the Constitution, and Massachusetts, the main reason why they disapproved of was the way it was drawn up. In other words, they said, no, the legislature, just because the legislature wrote this, we are going to reject it. And so now they had to listen to the people, and finally they appointed a convention for writing the Constitution of some of the best men in the country. It was a good thing that they did that because it gave inputs from all parts of the country. They got to choose who they wanted to represent them, and then when it was all said and done, were they going to automatically accept that Constitution? No, they still had the ultimate power. They had to accept it or reject it. This was brand new, folks. This was really an exciting opportunity for a country to start from scratch. You'll notice when you go to Europe or other countries, you were in a car and you're like, all of a sudden the street's getting real skinny and someone's coming the other way and they pull up on the sidewalk to let you by, and you make a turn and people are coming towards you, but there was no sign telling you it was a one-way street, or all of a sudden you're going this way and you're supposed to turn at sort of an angle that way and then an angle back this way and that way, and you go, this is crazy. Those streets grew up around the buildings and houses that were put there, and they didn't need to be any wider than a horse and buggy could go through. In America, you'll notice that most of our cities are laid out in some kind of organized pattern because we planned our cities from scratch. That didn't happen in countries that are thousands of years old. So that was another exciting part. Everything was new and could be written right from the beginning. The written frame of government was an American institution that would be admired and imitated all over the world for the centuries since we've written it. The British Constitution was a plan of government that could not be picked up and read. Isn't that interesting? They had pretty defined rules, but you couldn't pick it up and read it. There was no written constitution. It consisted of some basic documents like the big one. What's that? That was written in 1215. Pardon? The Magna Carta. The Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. But there was more, and it wasn't written down. It was a concoction of tradition and habit and their beliefs. Many Americans thought their rights to govern themselves would be safer if it were stated in plain language, written down, so you could say, look, it says right here that I have this right. You can't punish me for this. Look, you can't come into my house without a warrant. I am not letting you in. It's against the law. See, you want to see the law? Here it is. Get lost. There is truth in that, isn't there? That if we have it in writing, we have more protection. So these men had the most horrendous summer, I'm sure, of their lives. They were in Pennsylvania. It was hot. They were in Faneuil Hall, I believe. And if you go there, that room still exists and you can see it. But there they are trying to hammer out this Constitution. Now there's a book you can read called 1787. It borrows a lot from the notes of James Madison, who was the secretary. I think James Madison wrote down most of what happened at that conference. But anyway, here is this group of people, and they have to come to a consensus. Now, if I put 5 of you together and give you some difficult topics, it could take you days to come to an agreement, just with 5 people. But now we have people from every state, and they have different concerns. What is the South concerned about? Their slavery. They want the right to their slavery. Everybody has a different area of concern. Slavery is a big issue. The problem is that if we hadn't taken slavery out of the Constitution, it would never pass. So what the men did that was smart is they built into our Constitution ways that you can change the Constitution, legal ways to change it. They foresaw that culture grows and changes and develops, and they couldn't possibly know what America was going to be like in 100 years, and they knew that some of their rules might be obsolete. So they put the principles forth, and they built into our Constitution ways to change it, which is wonderful. So in your book, it talks about the state constitutions first, and it tells you what the pattern for them was. First, they had a section declaring the rights of citizens, and it included the freedom of the press, the right to petition the government, the right to resist search of your home, unreasonable search, and they had the right to have a standing army. So that was in most state constitutions. And they all but one state had a governor and an upper house and a lower house of the legislation. All were elected directly by the people or their elected representatives in the state. Only in Pennsylvania did the Constitution create a one-house legislature. That was kind of unusual. In all the colonies, there was an attempt to weaken the powers of the governor. Now, most states deprive the governor of his power to veto legislation or to dismiss the legislature and suspend its meetings. Why would they not give the governor power to all of a sudden say, you're closed, go home, we're stopping right here? When might he use that wrongly, that power? A little louder?
When there's an idea the governor doesn't like.
Yeah, if they're working on something he doesn't like. Let's say, for example, the FBI is searching whether our election has been rigged. What do you do to stop that? You just try, the governor in that case would have just canceled everything. Okay, go home, you guys are done working. That can be a dangerous power, and veto also. The legislature could impeach their governor. So they had rules like if a governor was doing a poor job, there were ways that he could be impeached. It had to be proven in court. You couldn't just say you're impeached. I mean, it had to go through a process. So now when we got to the area of equality in the states, we had a problem. We'll be talking about this more a little later, but I'm going to give you a little peek right now. if you're a tiny state like Rhode Island, who was always the last to agree on everything so that they jokingly called it Rogue Island, but Rhode Island was small. So now they're going to set up a legislature for the United States, and they say, well, let's have 2 representatives from every state. And Rhode Island liked that because it would have as much representation as everybody else. But California wouldn't have liked it, and the bigger states then didn't like it either because they said, that's our 2 people represent thousands and thousands more than your 2 people, that's not fair. Instead, let's do it this way. Let's have a representative for each certain number of the population. So that means the big states might have 5 or 6 representatives, the little state would have 1. The little state's unhappy now because they do not want to be squashed out. They have their unique concerns that nobody else has, but could they ever get them passed with 1 person? No. So now they're squawking and carrying on. And you're going to see that we come up with a brilliant solution to this problem. It seems obvious to us now, but it wasn't obvious then. But now, just to go over what you are being quizzed on, the first moves against slavery. As early as 1774, that's before the war even started, Rhode Island passed a law providing that those who are desirous of enjoying all the advantages of liberty themselves should be willing to extend liberty to others. Any slave brought into their state would be automatically free. Abigail Adams wrote to her husband on slavery, "It always appears a most evil scheme to me to fight ourselves for what we are daily robbing and plundering from those who have as good a right to freedom as we have." She's talking about the blacks. That same year, Continental Congress passed a law that no slaves were to be imported into the country after 1775. So now the only way you could have slaves was to breed them and sell them like cattle. You couldn't import any more in.
So the ones that were already there, like if they all died, you'd have no more slaves?
Right, but that wasn't going to happen because they were having babies like crazy. When Jefferson tried to include the slave trade in the Declaration of Independence as one of the king's abuses, the southern colonies objected. So it goes back and forth. Some, as we have seen, received their liberty for fighting in the American cause. When a slave in Massachusetts sued for his freedom because the new state constitution declared all men are created equal and free, the court agreed with him. With that decision in 1783, slavery ended in Massachusetts. But in the South, slavery is still strong, and this is the biggest problem to get the Constitution passed. What are we going to say about slavery? And we will be talking more about the problems of setting up that Constitution and what happened. But the results have been pretty good for us, wouldn't you say? Do you still feel like you're somewhat free? I mean, when my daughter visited Myanmar, and they're calling it Burma again, thank goodness, but when she visited Myanmar, she wanted to walk around the country and see things, and 2 people followed her everywhere she went. She went into a cafe. She met a really neat young couple that owned this cafe, and she wanted to visit with them. They sat down at her table, and behind them were these 2 people that had been following her everywhere, watching her. So this couple says to her, "Laugh and act like we're just talking about funny things." And then they went on to tell her how hard life was there, that they didn't think they'd be able to have their shop for long, that it would be taken over. They didn't want to have children because they didn't want to bring them into this restrictive society. So this was hard stuff. And my daughter says it was really a good thing she can act, because trying to laugh while you're hearing all this heartbreaking stuff was difficult. What if you had Big Brother? You know, you were monitored in your homes. You weren't allowed to do a lot of things. If you did, you would be severely punished. You couldn't speak against the government, or you would be put in jail. How would you like that one? I mean, Americans are the best about blabbing against the government, right? They complain. This guy's in, they hate him. This guy's in, they like him. I mean, they just go back and forth like crazy. Has anyone here never complained about a president of the United States? Anyone who's never complained out loud about a president? Well, Bill, you are the only one, and that's because you're from China. But Americans complain about their presidents and things that they don't like. We have freedom of speech. We can even put in the paper things we don't like. And fortunately, we have a law about slander. So if you print a bunch of lies about someone, you can be sued, but you can still speak your piece. Okay, we're going to do a quiz on this section now, and then we'll talk some more. This is called New State Governments. We started with the states.